June 26th, of course, 2024. I'm Connor with Connor MacIvor, local agent out here in Santa Clarita Valley, talking about Santa Clarita Open Houses.com and some information for sellers. Often they wonder how open houses sell real estate. It really comes down to a national statistic offered by National Association of Realtors. Doing the studies, we have some other information that came to be by other people out there that are looking as well and tabulating these things. So approximately in the neighborhood of 10%, 9 to 10%. I've seen numbers. I've also seen numbers as low as 3%, depending on the market. But that is typically what the percentage of odds are having an open house is going to sell yours. Now that's directly. Those numbers are somebody walking into that open house that had never seen that house before and deciding to purchase it right there on the spot. And that actually ends up going all the way through. So if you want to factor in some other variables, we can look at currently in the Santa Clarita market, we have somewhere between 20 and 35% of listings that actually go into escrow don't make it. So they'll get into escrow, but then it doesn't take very long. Something happens. Typically, it is not an issue of a buyer discovering some problem. Usually, a couple things happen more on the buyer end of it. A real estate buyer could potentially see something else they want to purchase more and jump ship at that point. That does tend to happen. However, it's very difficult to try to explain to somebody that's spending, hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of dollars, that they can't change their mind within the time period that they're allowed to change their mind. And there is a time period. It's basically the time frame in which the contingencies and contract have been established. So there's going to be a certain amount of time that you agree on this offer that you as a home buyer are making on real estate that's going to come back and basically be a time period in which you can cancel pretty much for any reason. Now, there are time frames that affect particular any reason things. So, for example, if in fact the any reason thing comes to be because of something having to do with a loan, there is a separate time period having to do with the loan, and that's an entirely separate contingency. But the inspections, those timeframes, typically, that is its own thing. So for any reason during that period of time, as it's been established, could be a reason for a buyer to cancel, them to be able to walk away with their deposit. However, here's something that people often talk about. Well, they think they're talking about it, but they're really not sure. And I'll give you this. Let's say that buyer's in escrow with the seller's residence. Let's say during that escrow time, excuse me, so much for live, still fighting a little bit of a cold. So during that escrow time frame, let's say that buyer decides to cancel maybe a day or two prior to when all of his contingencies have to be removed. And let's say this period of time has been 17 days. So at this point, come the 17th day, this buyer has a choice on whether to sign off on everything and say, yes, I'm going to move forward no matter what I discover, no matter what happens at this point, I'm going to move forward. So period, I'm going to sign on the line which is dotted, and I'm going to agree that I'm going to remove all of my contingencies. So at that point, once that buyer signs that and it gets back to the seller, then it is completed. So if that buyer at that point happens to cancel escrow, and of course, everything is subject to litigation, seek legal advice and all of those things. But what ends up happening is once it gets to that point and the buyer cancels, they should be able to retain their deposit. And the deposit, what does that look like? Right now, it's running about 3% of the actual price of the residence. So if you're going to offer on $1 million house, you're going to buy $1 million house, 3% is going to be about $30,000 of that residence. So that's what's going to that listing price. So that's what the deposit looks like. That's a little painful if in fact you have to cancel escrow at some point after you've already removed all your contingencies. But prior to that, you should be able to get that money back. There comes a point though and a question that what if during this time frame, and everybody should have known up front exactly what was happening. The seller should have been made aware. The buyer can cancel pretty much for any reason during this time. Once this time arrives and I send the buyer's agent, that's why it's important to have one agent on each side. Once I send that buyer's agent the document that says, hey, your buyer is either going to perform, remove their contingencies because time's up, they're now in breach of contract, or we're going to cancel the transaction if we don't hear from you or find some remedy within 72 hours, basically giving them a notice to perform at the same time. Is that hardball in real estate? Some agents would say yes, but the way that the market goes, the only way a person can really represent their home seller is by playing a little bit of hardball. So it might be necessary at times, at least it has been for me, that I play enforcer and I play hardball when it comes to the counters that I issue on behalf of my seller after we talk. The counter offers are important. The response for the request for repairs are important, the way that's formulated. And all of those things are critical for a home seller to make sure you're representing them in the best way possible. Now, once I send out that response, because the day has arrived when that buyer needs to remove their contingency. Once I send out that response, again, now we have a time frame that we're going to wait, but not very long. In fact, if the market's hopping, and there were other options at the beginning when we first originally accepted this particular buyer's offer via counter or multiple counters, which is probably the case in the current market as we are here in June 2024, I would say that in fact we would be able to more than likely retain that entire amount. So the buyers really need to consider whether or not they are going to, be pulling out of escrow prior to or after it's going to be subject to litigation. With regard to contingencies and timeframes and contract, it is so incredibly important to make sure you have your own advisor on your side. And that's why in a few states they do outlaw the practice of dual agency, where the listing agent, the agent representing the seller, also cannot also represent the buyer in that same transaction. That's something for a future stream. I'll talk about that at that time. I hope it was all clear and concise. Please let me know if I can answer any questions in the future. We are Santa Clarita Open Houses. You can go to santaclaritaopenhouses.com. And of course, any one of the system sites that we have, Castaic, Canyon Country, Newhall, Saugus, Stevenson Ranch, and Valencia, all you'd have to do is type in any one of those city names followed by the words openhouses.com. Valencia openhouses.com, Stevenson Ranch openhouses.com, so on and so forth. You'll see that current data, plus you'll be able to pull on every single listing currently listed for sale, plus you'll see yours truly talking about things that have to do with Santa Clarita Open Houses. Everybody be well. Don't forget that 6 degrees of separation. That open house could make a little bit of difference, although the statistics reflect very small percentages. This is, we're talking the home seller has a buyer walk in as a result of an open house, moving all the way through escrow and closing. That's a small percentage, even with a regular buyer. I'm Connor with Honor. We'll talk to you soon. Over and out.